Hello and welcome! In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through the journey of how I created my Tylee top, the first part of my full cosplay. So Tylee is the sugar sweet acrobat from Avatar, and I've been wanting to cosplay her because she's one of the coolest characters in my opinion, with her like little stabby, you know what I mean? Stabby fingers. She's always been one of my favorite characters. I think she's really cool. Yeah. I think that's a good enough reason. So real quick, if we haven't met before, hello, I am Jessie and I make stuff and I make videos about making that stuff. So if you enjoy watching people struggle, this is probably the channel for you. So be sure to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get rolling. The first order of business was to make a pattern for the bodice. Now, I am still new to pattern making, but I decided to start with a sloper. So a sloper, if you're not familiar, it's a custom pattern you can make based on your measurements that produces a garment that is skin tight to your body. Now, there are lots of tutorials online to make one for yourself, so I'm not going to get into that here, but it can be a handy thing to have when you're working with woven fabrics. Though in hindsight, I think they might be a bit more trouble than they're worth. You'll see. But here we have my slopers. I have the front and the back, and we need to turn this into Tylee's outfit. The real question is where I want to have the bust and the back darts. Right now I have them going down toward the waist, which could work just fine. Alternatively, I could do it under the bust, or I could even, if I wanted to, put it up into the shoulder and gather the extra fabric there. Why not all three? Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me make this as quick as I can. So I started with a princess seam dart, or a dart that runs from the shoulder all the way down to the waist. To do this, to move any dart, you can do a really easy pattern manipulation trick. Just cut out the dart from your pattern, and then cut a line from the new dart location toward that bust point. You can then rotate the pieces from the bust point and then tape it down where you want that new dart to be to make the location official. Or you can do what I did and just separate the pieces fully to make a princess seam. And a bonus trick, if your original pattern needs an adjustment or isn't big enough, save a tree and just Frankenstein on some old scrap paper from a failed sleeve pattern. With the pattern ready to go, it was time to make the mock-up and see how it fit. So, here is how it looked. And here's how I felt about it. I don't love the look of it. So this seam really bothered me because as I was studying Tylee's outfit, I realized that you can't actually see any clothing darts. And I know the fabric's not supposed to be a stretchy knit because Fire Nation clothes are based on traditional clothing from Southeast Asia. Of course, you could argue that this is a cartoon and cartoons never show darts on clothing. You could also argue that this is cosplay and no one cares, to which I'd say, well, fine, but I want to try anyway. So I made the very rational, logical decision to redo the whole thing and try to hide the dart underneath her neck thingy. Obviously we have lots of bagginess right here. I definitely want to move the dart inward more and move the end of the dart, the bust point, inward also. See if I can't make it more like up here. And then it would go It would mostly hide it. It would still be a little bit visible, but it would mostly hide it. Is that what I want? Apparently it is. Okay, so this still has some problems. We still have some bagginess. I did not adjust the underarm at all. So I feel like I just remove a little bit from the underarm. That's not awful. The only thing is that it will be baggy. I think we need to do the bust dart.
2 hours later.
So I think I have a design that is going to work. So we have a dart running from under the arm, down over the bust, down to an under bust dart. And I think that this will look the best with the neck piece going over. You'll see the whole dart, nothing will look chopped. It's kind of playful, the shape of it. I'm probably way overthinking this, but that's kind of what I do. Branding. So to be really sure that this was the way to go, I decided to do a full mock-up. And this looked great. But then, to be really, really sure, I decided to do another mock-up in some scrap satin that I had, because the fabric I'd actually bought for this costume was indeed satin. And it turns out this is exactly what I should have been doing from the beginning, because apparently all I needed was a simple little bust dart. Okay, seriously? I don't even know what to say. I have drafted this top like 4 or 5 different ways trying to make this work. And then as I went to go research how to sew satin, everything said like, oh, you should cut it and sew it on the bias because it adds some stretchiness and it flows really well. And then I was thinking, I'm like, okay, well, let's just give this a try. Let's just, I already have this drafted. We're ready to go, ready to cut. Let's just go ahead and throw this on and see what it looks like on the bias. It looks fantastic. Duh. So let's make this. So satin is super shiny, but Tylee's top isn't. So I decided to use the underside of the satin, which is a bit more muted. However, since chalk doesn't stick well to the shiny side of satin, I had to make all of my marks on the right side of the fabric. Yay! By the way, after I recorded this, I also invested in some disappearing ink pens because never again. Alright, I am pretty happy with how this is going. I initially thought that I would line the whole thing so that I could avoid having a seam showing on the waist part, right? The bottom seam here. I know you can't see, whatever. Because I don't want to cut out a whole liner, this took way too long. I'll just be real, that took way too long. I'm worried it's gonna add a little bit too much bulk. So instead what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna finish that bottom seam, roll it under, and then attach it. Here, let me show you. Attach it by stitching in the ditch, which is essentially stitching over previously stitched areas, or like stitching in that where the seam is. So I'm gonna finish the bottom, right, and I'm gonna roll it under and just let that sit there in the front. And that'll ultimately create a really, I think, flowy look. Looking at Tylee's shirt, it is very flowy. It's not something that's super sculpted, and actually I'm really happy with how this material has turned out. So let's keep going. So now it was time to draft the sleeves. Now I thought that since I'd recently made some sleeves for my last dress, that this time it would be smooth sailing. But, well, I'm gonna spare you the drama this time, but let's just say this wasn't the most straightforward process either. Now, if you've never made a sleeve before, I have 2 recommendations for you. First, go watch someone else's tutorial, because I'm not qualified to teach you how to do this. But second, one thing that's really helped me is to make a pattern of an existing sleeve in your closet that's similar to the kind of top that you're trying to make. So you can do this by carefully tracing the front and the back of both the sleeve and the armhole. Sleeve patterns can be super finicky, and this will give you a really good idea of how a sleeve pattern can affect the shape of a sleeve in real life. Every time that I do a new part of a sewing project, I think that like I've learned from the last time I did it, and this time it's gonna go so much faster. So the sleeve is now drafted. I have no idea how well it is drafted. I know that it will fit. I don't know how the shape will look, but whatever it looks like, we're going with it because I don't have time for this. Alright guys, the sleeves are attached. As you can see, they do not fall off. These are sewn on. These are not pinned on because I finally created a sleeve shape that looks like a sleeve and hangs mostly correctly. So this was definitely a process. It took way longer than I anticipated. That's okay. This is all a learning process, and something that I'm just kind of coming to terms with is that it's going to take longer than I planned. And that doesn't mean that I am necessarily bad at sewing or bad at making these things. I'm just bad at estimating time. I'm sure that I'll get faster over time, but in the meantime, this is just how it goes, and I'm gonna have to be okay with that. But overall, I learned a lot about this process, about how sleeves are drafted specifically, and what changes their shape. Let me just give you a little lesson. So this is the sleeve pattern that I have for the sleeves on this. And there's a couple different measurements going on here that really change the way that the sleeves feel on the body. So first of all, we have the width from this point down to this point. And if you've never made a sleeve before, basically this is how it lays on the body. It's just like that. So this point is going to be how wide it is around my arm. This is the bicep width or bicep circumference. And initially I had done this a little bit too tight, and that made the whole thing feel tight. Even though I felt like it felt okay when I just took the measuring point, the measuring tape, and put it on my arm, that felt fine. Once I actually made it, it felt really tight. So one of the first things that I needed to do was to make this wider. You can see all the extra that I've added on the sides. The other big thing I learned was how the cap height really impacts how this feels. So you can see, compared to a lot of sleeve patterns that you might see, this is actually shorter than a lot of them. A typical one is maybe all the way up to here, but this is quite a bit shorter. It basically means that if you have a shorter cap height, the arm is going to be sticking out at more of an angle, and that means that you have a greater range of motion with that shorter cap height. So I'm learning a ton here, and YouTube has been my best friend. If you're getting started with sewing, like, it all takes time. You're gonna learn so much. I keep getting an ego about things. Like, yeah, I just learned so much. I'm gonna make this so quickly. And no, it's gonna take time, but that's okay. Anyway, let's get back to this. Next up, I needed a way to expand the neck hole so that I could fit it over my head when the back was entirely sewn up. To do this, I used one of my favorite techniques that I've shared before. You just create a small reinforced lining piece and put it right sides together to where the slit needs to go. Then you sew a tight V shape, cut down between the V, and then move the fabric to the inside of the garment. Then iron in place and do the tiniest top stitch to keep the whole thing down. Then I sewed on a little hook and eye closure. So checking in, I want to show you what progress I've made so far. The back is not complete yet, which is actually why I am very cleverly positioned in front of this mirror so that you can sort of see. So this is currently just open. I'm going to be putting in a zipper, but I'm putting it in upside down. So this is an invisible zipper. Right, this is how it would normally open. I'm going to be putting it in like this so that it can open up on the bottom to actually, you know, be able to put it on. And then because this opens, then it can fit over my head, and it's a little janky, but like, it works and it's gonna have the intended effect. So at this point, I just need to figure out how high I want the waist to be as far as the crop of it, because, oh gosh. So I just have a raw edge right here. And actually, I kind of just like how it fits just like a shirt like this, but I know that in order to be accurate, it needs to be a little bit higher. So I keep playing with it, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do as far as how high that will be, but we'll figure it out. All right, let's go ahead and try this out. Now, every one of my videos deserves a proper disaster, right? So I was trimming along my seam allowance with this flat on the ground. Then I stopped and I thought, oh, I should make sure that I don't have anything underneath. Yeah. After a few deep breaths and a snack, I decided that instead of replacing the whole sleeve, which I had already sewn in and hemmed by hand, I'd just patch it up. To do this, I ironed on a small piece of interfacing. This would just kind of keep everything in place. Then I used a bit of fray check, and this protects the threads from coming loose. But the interfacing didn't stick very well, and the fray check dried a bit dark. So to finish it, I pulled out some threads from the actual fabric, then used those to embroider over the dark areas. I felt like a freaking genius here, and the result is a strong patch that is visible but not really noticeable. Finally, I went back to working on the ribcage hem. Again, I wanted to hide the hem by folding the whole thing under. So to make this work, I attached a 1-inch band of interfacing with the top of the band where I wanted the end of the fabric to be. I sewed this down, then folded it, and finally sewed the band vertically on the sides as planned. This took a few tries to get just right, but in the end it worked perfectly. Next, I was finally able to sew on the zipper. This also took a few tries to get right since it was my first ever time sewing a zipper, but I just watched a few tutorials which made it pretty simple. After that was sewn down, I also turned up the back hem like in the front and hand stitched it to the zippers that it would stay tucked under, just like I'd done on the sides. The last piece to attach was the collar. I just drafted a simple mandarin collar, making it slightly taller in the front, just like Tylee's. I added a layer of interfacing to one of the pieces, then sewed the lining and the facing right sides together, leaving the bottom open so that I could turn it inside out. Before ironing it inside out though, I actually turned up one side of the seam allowance. This made it a lot easier when it came time to finish the entire collar, as you'll see in a minute. Now, I needed a way to sew the collar to the bodice so that it would hide the seam allowances. To do this, I sewed only the outer part of the collar, right sides together to the bodice. This is where that ironed down seam comes in. Because that seam was already ironed so that it was folded under, I was able to sandwich all the seam allowances between the two collar pieces. Of course, this meant I needed to hand sew that inner collar piece down with a whip stitch so that it wouldn't be visible from the outside. And what better way to get a lot of hand sewing done than to try to watch a movie at the same time. Now this is the part where I joke that in order to recreate the tutorial entirely, you should watch the same movie. But my choice was unfortunately Tron Legacy, and I wouldn't force that on you. Don't get me wrong, I loved this movie when it came out. I still love the costumes, but this time it just kind of felt like a teenage boy's fantasy, and ugh. I also got the sleeves finished while I watched this because, well, it kept my eyes off the screen. Just kidding, I love you, Michael Sheen. Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Oh, you like my top? Thank you, thank you. I made it myself. So this is the finished top, guys. Well, minus the neck piece. That's what we're working on today. Now, I say finished. There are two things that I still need to do on here. Number one, the inside of the lining, this little tiny piece right here, that needs to be like whip stitched so it doesn't come unraveled over time. Or I could just put fray check on it. We'll see how lazy I am. And the second thing is there's like, I don't even know if it's visible. Right here, there's a ripple in the fabric. That is totally inconsequential, but it's bothering me. But we're not gonna be perfectionists. Yes, we are. Okay, let's talk real quick about how this collar needs to look. So the easiest way to create this would just be to create a square that's folded in half with a neck piece cut out, right? That would be the easiest one. However, that won't look quite right. That'll look really cartoony. Instead, if you look at how it's actually shaped, we have a couple things going on here. So if we have the neck hole here, the first thing is that it's actually sloped with her shoulders, right? Shoulders are not straight across, they are sloped a little bit. The next thing is that these aren't even straight. They actually flare out just a little bit. Not nearly as much as some of the other characters, but they do have a slight flare to it. The next thing is that these actually come down into a slightly different shape. So instead of just a right angle here, these go a little bit concave to come to a point. So that is going to be the shape that I'll be mimicking. This is what will make it look really realistic and true to the character. So I tried this a few different ways, but the one that worked was to just use the pattern that I had already made. Concept, right? So I drew a line the width that I wanted the neck piece to be. Then I used my original pattern to get the shoulder slope right and that neck hole in the right place and the right length. Finally, I measured down from the neckline to the tip in the front to see how long I needed that to be, and just free-handed a curve that looked about right. By the way, does anyone still have Frozen 2 songs stuck in their head? I swear I've been singing them like every day for a month. Anyway, then I made the back following the same process. So I've encountered a bit of a problem. The problem here is that the front fits well, but the reason why it fits well is that when it lays, it curves a bit like this, right? So here's the shoulders going down and the sleeve room for my bust. However, in the back, I don't have boobs. I do not have back boobs. The problem is that when this is lying on the back, it actually ends up stretching a little bit like this, because the neck hole is actually wider and flatter than this neck hole here. Like the neck hole of my garment is wider and flatter than this. So what I need to do is actually make this whole thing a little bit wider than the front and shallower. So now we just have to figure out how to do this. This actually wasn't hard. I just cut it down the middle, spread it out, added some more paper behind it, and then drew a wider neckline that was still gonna be the right length. At last, it was time to make the darn thing. So I got this lovely red taffeta to add a bit of pizzazz to the costume without going over the top, because the material you use can really change how your costume looks, and the right fabric can make even a simple cosplay look really nice. At least that's what I kept whispering to myself during the roughly 4 hours I spent at the fabric store. So I cut out 2 pieces of each pattern piece so that I could add a layer of interfacing to the middle, and once I ironed the fusible interfacing to the facing, I then attached the front and the back facing layers at the shoulder, and then attached the lining layers at the shoulder. Then I ironed the seams open and sewed the edge and the neck hole with right sides together. After trimming the seam allowance and clipping all the curves, I turned the whole thing right side out through the open shoulder and ironed it flat. Then I attached another invisible zipper so that I could fit the whole thing over my head. And although no one would see the underside of the neck piece, I also decided to hand fell the seams. Just because I'm a perfectionist and I'd already poured in so many hours of my life into this, what was one more? And finally, after almost 2 weeks of solid work that probably could have been done in a day or two if I cared a lot less, Kylie's top was officially finished. You know, I look forward to the day when these videos will be like, hey guys, I made this thing and it only took me a reasonable amount of time. Obviously, I am so happy with how this turned out. The one thing that I may change in the future is I may add some sort of maybe Velcro underneath just to keep this from going like that. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're doing that yourself. Do something like that. I don't know. If you like this video, please tell Papa YouTube I did a good job by giving it a thumbs up button. It really helps and I so appreciate it. Next up, I'm gonna be working on Tylee's pants and her flappy little skirt thing, so stay tuned for that. Also, I've been working on Tylee's voice for no reason. It's just really fun. To my followers, thank you so much for being here. I am so stoked to have you along for the ride. And to my new viewers, if this is your first time watching one of my videos, welcome! Hey, if you made it this far in the video, chances are you're gonna like my next video as well. Just statistically, so you may want to stick around. And also guys, if you want more like in the moment updates, I try to share a lot more over on Instagram. You can find me at It's Jessie Lewis. I would love to see you over there. With that, thank you so much for watching. It's been cool. Glad to have you here. I don't know how to end these. Oh wait, yes I do. Hello, welcome. Bleh. Okay. Look, it's you. So I'm gonna go do a full mock-up of this just because I really want this to be perfect and maybe I shouldn't. I'm tired. I did not sleep well last night. The cat didn't want his food and so he was screaming at the door at 4 in the morning. Cats. We love them and we hate them. Mostly love, I think. I don't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway.